Welcome back to Cricket Aviation. My name is Jim Payne, and behind me is a completed rear fuselage for a CriCri. Now in this video, we're going to start off from where we left off on the first rear fuselage video. So we're going to go through the process of installing and gluing all of the foam stiffeners that go inside the rear fuselage. We're going to go ahead and rivet all of the rear fuselage frames in place. And we are going to glue and pop rivet all of the skins together. In addition to that, we are going to install the vertical fin. So at this point, based on all the other videos that I've done with the horizontal tail, the vertical tail, and the rudder, we've got this assembly all complete at this point. Please subscribe to the channel if you want notifications when I come out with new videos. Please like the video, and if you stick around, we will finish the rear half of a CriCri.
Yes, I'm building the world's smallest twin-engine airplane.
So I've taken the rear fuselage back out now because we are going to go ahead and finalize everything here on the rear fuselage, including all the allodyning, gluing and riveting of this assembly. During the fin installation check, I did, drill all of the holes to attach the fin, and even drilled these to their final size of the 1/8 inch rivets. But I've got a couple things I do want to finish here before we actually tear this down. I still need to drill and locate these straps on the vertical fin, and I think what I'm going to do is, because these are attached to this frame that goes down here, I'm going to pull this whole frame out but leave these attached, and using these two holes here, these two rivet holes that attach to the fin, I'm going to go ahead and temporarily attach this to the fin with it removed from the fuselage, and see if I can make sure that these are bent to the correct shape, if they need to be twisted anymore at all or moved apart. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and pre-drill the holes into these straps here, and then I'll drill them back through the fin. What that's going to allow me to do is I should be able to get these all fit correctly while I have the fin removed from the fuselage, and I'm able to actually see up in the bottom of it and exactly see how those are going to fit. So I think that's one of the first things I'm going to do. I believe every other rivet, or at least most of the rivets in the rear fuselage, I've already drilled out to the proper rivet size. So at this point, I'm really ready to take this all apart and go ahead and allodyne the insides of all these panels. The outsides are just going to stay the bare aluminum, but I do want to go ahead and allodyne all of the internal parts here, including the frames. And then what we also can do is we can take this apart, allodyne all of the parts of frame 7 here, and then go ahead and final rivet all of these parts into place. And then we're just not going to attach this to the rear fuselage at this point, other than with temporary sheet fasteners, until we get this frame 7 fit to the forward fuselage. In fact, I think what we end up doing is we'll end up riveting this to the forward fuselage, and then we'll come back, take the rear fuselage, slip it over the top, and then go ahead and do all these pop rivets all the way around the rear fuselage. I believe that's how it's set up to be put together. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to get the fin out right now and go ahead and make sure that I can get these fit into place. Then I'm going to go tear the whole thing down. So this is the fit I was talking about with this frame that I pulled out and these straps that come up here. And there's going to be, I think it's 4 rivet holes that need to get drilled into here, into those straps. But what we want to do is first make sure that we're at exactly 90 degrees here with this frame. And then you'll see, if we look down in here, hopefully you can see where the straps kind of coming away at the bottom. So I don't quite have the curvature correct on these, and so what I'm going to do is just bend these and move these a little bit. The shape at the base, it looks like it's hitting both on the front and back, so that's good. It's just the angle at the top. I've got them angled in a little bit too far. But so what I'm going to do is bend those to the correct position, and then I'm going to drill the 4 holes in the strap, and then I'll just use my angle drill to come in through the backside here and drill it through the skin. And then I'll have all 4 of those rivet holes ready to go when we go ahead and install the vertical fin. The other thing I need to do with these straps before I permanently attach them to the frame here is there's a hole here. Hopefully you can see there's a hole here and a hole here. That's where the mount point is for the bell crank that comes through here. There's a flight control that comes from the front of the fuselage. In fact, it comes from where this hole is here. So there's a bell crank that gets installed across here, top to bottom, because this is on its side, that then connects with a flight control back through here, where there's a pivot point that goes through here, and then there's a flight control rod that goes up to the horizontal stabilizer at the top that connects to that fitting. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to create all of these flight control parts. I'm going to do that as a separate step after the rear fuselage is done. But I do need to final drill these holes to the hole size that we're going to use for the bolt that goes through here that holds this bell crank in place. I know that's going to be a 1/4 inch bolt because I'm using an Imperial aircraft equivalent size bolt. So I'm going to go ahead and final drill those holes out to a 1/4 inch. Then we'll be ready to Aladyne these parts once I get all the rivet holes drilled on either side and get those straps positioned. Be able to Aladyne these, pop rivet these to the frame, and then this frame will be ready to install into the fuselage. When we get to the point of having the 3 sides of the fuselage ready to be glued and riveted, we want to make sure that this frame back here is ready to go, and this one back here is ready to go. I think this one here, there's those doubler plates on here that you can see where the cables go through for the rudder. Those need to be finished and pop riveted onto this before this is ready to be installed permanently. So we just want to finish up these 2 frames, really. I think it's 11 and 12 here, so that we're prepared when we're ready to glue these skins on. And so I'm just going to finish these pop rivets next, get all these holes aligned and set up, and then we'll take this thing apart. So I finished drilling the holes for these straps that mount to this this frame here. I was able to get my angle drill in from the inside and drill the first 3, but the top one I had to just put a piece of tape here and just measure, draw a straight line up from these holes and then measure and then drill with a 1/16 inch drill to locate that hole, and then put the bracket on it and just opened it up to a 3/32 hole. None of these are the final size. These are supposed to be 1/8 inch holes, but I'm not going to drill those until the fin is actually installed, just in case these are a tiny bit off after everything's popped riveted on the bottom and glued in place. I'll take an 1/8 inch drill and go ahead and just widen these out, but at least the holes are marked in the right spot. I made sure that these are exactly 90 degrees from the fin, from where that frame is. So we should be pretty good with these in the position they're at. So I'm going to go ahead and Aladyne these brackets, and I'm going to Aladyne the frame that they get attached to, and I will go ahead and pop rivet these into place. As you can see, I did widen out these to a 1/4 inch hole on either side, so we should be ready to install those. I finished prepping these 2 rear fuselage frames. I finished drilling all the holes for these straps that go in and these doublers that go in here for the rudder cables. Now the manual indicates that these should be glued and riveted into place, and it also says that we can use pop rivets. The manual says that we can use pop rivets to attach these. It does not say that we need to glue these in. I'm going to glue them anyway, as I've mentioned before, just to seal the back sides of these to prevent corrosion. It's just an additional thing that you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and pop rivet all these in as the manual suggests. I could use solid rivets in these. These are actually pretty easy to put solid rivets in, but the manual says I can use pop rivets, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and use. I've got the internals that are going to go inside the fuselage for the most part, Aladyne, glued and riveted into place. I just got to let the glue dry on these fittings here that I have in place. And I went ahead and spot stamped my bearing into my bottom fitting for the rudder. And then I've got frame 13, which I went ahead and ran through the Aladyne process. So I'm going to let this stuff sit overnight and dry, and then I'm going to come back tomorrow morning and start working on the fuselage skins. So I've got the fuselage, rear fuselage upside down here, and I pulled the bottom panels off of it. And what I'm going to try and do is follow along with the manual at this point as if I'm building this from the very beginning. So what I'm going to do is this top panel here, because this is upside down, this top panel here into two sides, we're going to take all of this apart, and I'm going to prep those three pieces, including the bottom panel that I took off here. I'll prep that one also, to apply Aladyne on the inside. And what I'm going to do is try and leave the plastic on the outside of all these parts. I'll take the plastic off the inside, we'll scour and scuff up those parts, and I'll just create a big plastic area that I can set these panels in to get them Aladyned. And I'll tape off, I'll actually tape off underneath this panel along here where the edge of this other panel is going to be glued and pop riveted to it. Again, I'm trying to keep all of the metal to metal bonded areas Aladyne free. The foam to Aladyne bonding doesn't seem to matter too much because the foam would fail long before the Aladyne joint will. So I'll do that around this top panel here, is just tape off the areas that I don't want the Aladyne process to occur on. And once those are done, we're going to go ahead and put glue on these side panels and get these pop riveted into place. And again, like I said, I'm following along the rear fuselage construction part of the manual, where the first part is to prep these three panels for corrosion protection, and then go ahead and glue and pop rivet these sides onto here. The next step after that will be to come back and pop rivet in the three frames back here. And then the steps after that are to start doing the foam stiffeners that get installed inside of the fuselage. And I haven't made those yet, so we'll go through the process of making and gluing those into place. I finished prepping the rear fuselage panels to Aladyne. And as you can see, I just set up a framework here on top of a plastic table and covered it with plastic and filled it with 5 gallons of Aladyne, and just putting each part in there one at a time. And then I've got another table set up just like it over here that's actually filled with water, so that I can take the parts from there and rinse them over here in the water. And I'm just going to do that with all 4 of the panels for the rear fuselage. I finished, you can see the side panels are laying over there, but I finished scuffing those up, cleaning those off with acetone. On this panel here, you can see where I went around with blue tape around the edge, just to prevent the Aladyne from being applied to the areas that are going to be glued and riveted. So I'm just going to finish Aladyning these parts, and then we'll get to the gluing and riveting of the rear fuselage. So here's the 2 sides and the top of the rear fuselage that I've Aladyned and am ready to glue and pop rivet. You can see where I took the tape off that I had covering the edge that's going to be overlapping the side panel, so I can get a metal to metal bond in those areas. And then I did go along the top of each one of the side panels and just scuffed up that edge also, so it's ready to be glued. And yeah, so I think I'm just going to mix up some glue, and just on the plastic table here, I'll go ahead and glue these panels on and pop rivet it, and then set it on a level surface to dry overnight. I did want to show you, I finished the tail skid bracket that mounts right here in the back. That's been drilled out to the 1/8 inch size holes. So when I go ahead and put the 2 side panels together and glue this together, I am going to glue and pop rivet this in place at the same time, so I can install the 1/8 inch rivets that go there. And there are a couple spots where I did drill out the edge panel to the 1/8 inch rivet sizes. I know the manual mentions putting all the 3/32 pop rivets all the way along here, and then I think it talks about drilling some of them out. I know it talks about at least drilling some of these out here where the angles are going to go later on, but it doesn't really mention these here. Obviously, I don't want to put a pop rivet in here until I get the frame installed, or one here or one here. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and just install a temporary sheet metal fastener in those 3, I guess it's 6 locations. So I've been playing around a little bit with trying to figure out the best way to glue this panel, this top panel, onto the sides and just hold everything and make sure that I can get everything positioned properly. So what I decided to do is take the 2 side panels and pin them back on frame 7, because now that holds them and supports them upright. And instead of trying to glue both sides and rivet everything at the same time, I think what I'm going to do is apply glue to just this one side. I'll slide the panel over and get one side pop riveted, and then I'll just lift up the other side and apply the glue and lay it back down on the other side and pop rivet it along there so that I don't have this top panel sliding around while I'm trying to get rivets and, or even possibly temporary sheet metal fasteners in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and put glue all the way along here. I'll slide the panel over, just lay it down on top, and then go ahead and put in all the pop rivets across here. I think that's gonna be the easiest way to do this. All right, I just got back in the shop this morning and I let the rear fuselage top skin here dry overnight. I got all the pop rivets in, got all the glue on it. Definitely using frame 7 to support these upright while I was gluing it was the perfect solution. That worked out really, really well. I didn't have to try and hold things straight and stuff while I was trying to install the pop rivets. So everything here looks good. The next step is going to be to install all the frames and these side supports that go on the bottom that need all of the nut plates installed on them. There's also nut plates that need to go on the end of this frame and on the end of this frame. Some of these are not going to be installed, at least on frame 11, until we go to put the bottom panel on, because the pop rivets that hold the nut plates on are supposed to go through the skin, and the skin has to be glued down to the top surface of frame 11, which is this frame here. So we won't be putting these in until we go to install until after we glue and install the bottom panel. But all of these parts in the aft section here don't need to be glued, so it's pretty straightforward. I just need to go and allodyne these parts, get them positioned in the right spot, and go ahead and get all the pop rivets in and pop rivet all of this in place. That should actually go fairly quickly. I thought I'd show you real quick what it looks like after I flipped it over, because now you can actually see the glue joint down in here between the side panels and the top panel. This looks perfect. I didn't get too much glue on there. It looks like I got just enough. And yeah, this looks really good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get these side supports installed next and start pop riveting the frames in place. I wanted to show you here that I did get the 2 angles pop riveted into place underneath here. You can see I'm installing the nut plates on the back of the one over there. And I did want to show you, so I'm installing these nut plates here. I'm using countersunk pop rivets to install these. There's pop rivets that are made really for these type of nut plates. They're actually stainless steel, and they're very commonly used in aircraft maintenance. And so I'm installing these with pop rivets. It's a lot easier than trying to buck these or even squeeze these in this area. But I did want to show you the countersinking tool I'm using. So I'm not using just a standard aircraft countersinking tool that's got a stop on it. With these, I wanted to be a little bit more accurate than I think I can get with those, and I was a little bit worried about the positioning of these holes. But I'm using this. It's a 1/4 inch, 100-degree angled carbide countersink that I got off of Amazon, I believe. But it has multiple flutes on it, and it makes a perfectly smooth, chatter-free hole. I've been using this on several spots where I've had to do countersunk rivets on the CriCri, and it works great, especially when you need to get into a spot where you can't get into because of clearance reasons with the larger aircraft style of countersink that has the big stop on the end of it. This has worked great for me in several different spots, including the wing spar. So I just wanted to point that out and show you this, because this really makes a nice, really clean hole. And so I'm just going to go along here and keep installing these nut plates. And yeah, so I'm going to keep working on this. So the other thing I did want to show you with these nut plates too is I am using the floating nut plates, so they move around quite a bit. And what's really nice about the floating nut plates is that when you go to install the screw doesn't have to be in there straight. It doesn't have to be positioned straight, because the nut will find the center of the screw. And that's why I like to use the floating nut plates on any panel that needs to come on and off, because you can just put the screw in, just start screwing it in, and it will find the nut, or the nut will find the end of the screw. So I just want to show you that. Those are a little bit easier to work with on panels that you have to remove. All right, I got all the nut plates in place, including the ones on top of frame 12 here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pop rivet the frames into place. I'm going to start on the back and work my way forward, and I think what I'm going to do is put the pop rivets on the top side, you know, because this is upside down, on the top side first on all of them so that I don't tighten up the sides too much as I go and can position them in the right spot without scratching things up too much. I have to look at this though. This is supposed to get installed with these two center rivets being countersunk. And what I have to figure out right now is whether or not I need to try and dimple those or if I can just put a countersink bit on there and countersink them. This is only 20 thousandths material, so I believe it should be dimpled. So I might need to see what I need to do with that. I'm not sure I have a dimple die for 1/8 inch, but I'll have to check. So I do have to deal with that before I get started here. But otherwise, I'm just going to put all the 1/8 inch pop rivets in these and get these into place here. So I did verify that the two rivets in the center here do need to be countersunk and dimpled. The skin is too thin to try and just drill a countersink. So I went ahead and dimpled both of those holes and the two on this so that that will fit in place there, and I'm going to go ahead and pop rivet that in. The dimpling tool with the hand squeezer does fit inside of this hole, so you can get it in here and maneuver it to put those into place. So that was fairly quick and easy. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish pop riveting these in. I thought I'd show you a quick modification I did with my pop rivet gun here. These 1/8 inch pop rivets fit fairly loose in this hole here, and I was noticing that with these aluminum pop rivets that when I pulled them on the horizontal stabilizer is that it kind of deformed the hole when it finally popped, and I had to go back and kind of sand off and fix the hole area around where the pop rivet was pulled, just because it didn't leave a clean it didn't leave the rivet head clean. And so for the fuselage ones, what I'm doing is I've got a steel washer here that I drilled out to the exact size of this rivet stem, and I'm putting this on top of the rivet so it fits perfectly over the stem. And then what I'm doing is sticking this in and pulling the pop rivet with this little washer on the front to make sure that it's a nice tight fit around the stem, between the stem and the pop rivet. It seems to pull much cleaner, and I get a really nice rivet head when I do that. So yeah, I'm just going to finish pulling the rest of these rivets. I just finished pop riveting the 3 frames in place, the one here, the one here, and the one here. And you can see the 2 countersunk rivets that had to be installed here that I dimpled. This turned out really well. I'm actually quite happy with this. So let me talk a little bit about the rivets I'm using, because I have a couple different rivets set out here. So this is the standard Avex pop rivet that's recommended by the designer, and I decided to use that for all the 1/8 inch rivets that I did install in the rear fuselage here. But I also have these other rivets here, this one here. So this is an AAPQ rivet, and it's much more of a structural rivet. I don't know if you can see that, how well that focuses, but the end of that rivet actually has a serrated end that gets embedded into the structure that it's being pulled into. This also has a much bigger head on it so the head on this is quite a bit bigger than the head on this. In fact, I can put these 2 next to each other. You can see what these look like. Yeah, hopefully that shows up. So the only place I can use these AAPQ cherry rivets, these more structural rivets, is in a place where the material thickness that I'm pulling together is, I believe it's thicker than 60 thousandths. So those work good for like angles or brackets or something that you're putting on where you're pulling a thicker piece of material onto a thinner piece. It's going to hold a lot better. And so what I'm planning on doing is using those cherry rivets for a lot of the fuselage angles on the front half of the aircraft. You will see I did use it in these 4 end rivets on the tail here that hold the tail skid bracket in place, because that was a good structural place to use those rivets. On the frames here, the only place where I had a thick enough material that I could have used it is right here where I went through, I'm sorry, down here where I went through the angle that's on the other side that has those nut plates on it. That's one place I could have used that one. I didn't use it there mainly because aesthetically it wouldn't have looked as good to have a bigger head rivet there on the bottom when all the other rivets that are around it that are 1/8 inch would have been a different head size. So I decided just to use the standard, designers recommended pop rivets in those places. But I did want to mention that I do have these slightly different, more structural cherry rivets that I am using in certain places on the aircraft. All these other 3/32 rivets that are in the fuselage here, there's really only one type of rivet you can get. They're not structural, they're still just the AVEX rivets, but they're a very basic, they're just a very basic pop rivet, because anything in the 3/32 size isn't really considered structural anyway. And I think that's part of the reason that the designer has us glue all the areas where we're installing 3/32 rivets. But anyway, this looks really good. I'll flip it over and I'll show you what it looks like on the other side with the frames installed. Here's what the frames look like on the inside of the rear fuselage now that they are pop riveted into place. And I skipped these rivets here. I skipped a couple rivets on these two frames on 11 and 12 just because that's where the fin gets pop riveted on the top. And so there's 2 rivets here that got skipped and 2 down in there that are skipped on that frame. Those will get pop riveted in place when we actually install the fin. But yeah, this everything's nice and tight. I got a good fit on everything. It really looks good. So I'm very happy with this. So the next thing I'm going to do is finish the tail skid. I might as well finish this now. There's nothing that I can tell, no reason that I shouldn't finish everything back here at this point, because the only thing we have left to do in here is to put all the foam stiffeners that we need to cut and glue into place between here and frame 7. So I can go ahead and finish everything from here back. The only thing I'm not going to do is install the fin until I get all of these stiffeners in place, so I can flip this thing over and turn it on its side without the fin sticking out. But yeah, we can finish up the tail skid here and finish up the cover plate that goes on there. I don't have any of the clear parts that are supposed to be installed on top of here or on top of this panel that's going to get screwed into place. I'm going to do that sometime near the completion of the project when I get to that point. But this is the panel that screws on here. There's got to be a clear plastic Lexan piece here, clear plastic Lexan piece here that gets pop riveted into place. I haven't even drilled those holes yet that go in here. I figured I'd do that at the time that I cut that panel out. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get this tail piece done. I have the tail skid parts allodyne, and I went ahead and pop riveted this bracket that goes in the back of the tail skid cover. And now I'm ready to go ahead and just pop rivet this onto the end here, like so. So I'll pop rivet that in place, and basically the rear fuselage, as far as all of the metal ribs, is all complete, with the exception of the bracket that needs to be installed in here for the rudder. I'm going to hold off on that because I'm going to do one slight modification to that bearing support down there, just to make sure that that bearing doesn't have the ability to come out. And next we're going to start working on all the stiffeners that need to be made in here. I've got to do some CAD drawings and cut out some of the foam and cut out some metal strips to be able to put on top of those pieces of foam, and once I get those cut out, you'll see how they actually fit inside of here and how they actually stiffen the rear fuselage. Okay, I've got the tail skid all pop riveted in place, and I did create the tail skid several weeks ago. This is just made out of 3/16 music wire. I just heated it up to the point where it was red hot, and I was able to pound the end of it flat and drill a hole through it. And then I was able to put the other bends that go through here, and this mounts through the hole here and gets attached to that tail skid mounting plate with bolt that we had created before. I'm going to go ahead and bolt this into place real quick, and you can see what the tail skid looks like. And that's what a CriCri tail skid looks like. Oh, sorry, I was just admiring my work. Okay, so what we're going to work on next is all of the remaining frames that need to be installed in this rear fuselage area between frame 7 on the end there and frame 11 there. And what gets installed in this area in between is frames that are built out of the foam material. So this sheet of foam that I have back here, which is about 3/8 of an inch thick, as you can see, we're actually going to cut, it's about 2.5 frames that need to go in here. There's frame 10 back here, which is kind of a half a frame. There's just a piece on the top and the bottom. And then there's 9 and 8 that go here that are complete frames similar to this, but just made out of foam. And what we're doing with these foam frames is that we're using them as stiffeners for this rear fuselage. And then in between, there's a full length piece that needs to go from this frame all the way down the center to the front. And then there's 2 pieces that go across the top and the bottom in here also that just help stiffen this, sheet metal material here. And what we're going to do is I cut out this morning a bunch of these cap strips, and this is 20 thousandths aluminum that's about 3/8 of an inch wide. I think it's 9.5 millimeters. But this is what gets glued to the top edge of all of these frames to stiffen them up. So we're going to be doing basically a foam support, similar to this, with a sheet metal cap strip on the top of it, and that will be glued down into this rear fuselage section to finish it off. It's super lightweight, and it provides a lot of rigidity to the skin surface here. And so that's what I'm going to work on next. Now I'm going to build this different than how the manual recommends doing it. Part of it is just because of the tools that I have. And so what the manual actually recommended is that you buy a block of foam material in 20 millimeters and 30 millimeters, if you could find them, thick. And then you just glue down a rectangular sheet of 20 thousandths material on top of it. And then what you would do is take that block with the sheet metal on top of it and you'd run it through your table saw to basically cut pieces or strips of foam with this glued on top of it. That's probably a much easier process to do. I don't have a very good table saw here, and I didn't want to try and figure out if that was going to work and if it was going to chew up the aluminum when I tried to cut it. I was really concerned about having it turn out right and not ruining it, when I cut it out. So I'm going the difficult route, and that's to buy a 3/8 sheet and cut the strips out and then glue this cap on top. Now, the big disadvantage of doing it this way is that I have a ton of gluing I have to do, and I can't do all the gluing at once. As you can imagine, if I do a strip that goes all the way down end to end here, and I cut that foam piece out of the foam, then I have to glue one of these on top of it. I have to let that sit for hours, if not overnight, until it dries before I can actually install it. And then I got to do the next one. And I probably can't do all of these at once, just because this foam's kind of flimsy. At least it's flexible, and I gotta hold that perfectly straight in some kind of form when the cap gets glued on there. And I think I might just, cut a slot in a 2x4 to just slip that piece of foam in there to make it perfectly straight so that I can glue this cap strip on top. So this is going to take a little while to do. The other thing is this piece of foam I bought was 48 inches wide. And I bought it 48 inches wide because the longest pieces that need to go in the back here are just over 47 inches long. However, when I heat treated that, it shrunk more than an inch lengthwise. So that sheet right now is only 47 inches long. And so now I even have more gluing to do because although, the manual says it is okay to piece together these parts as they go across. In other words, I could take two 24-inch pieces, glue them in the middle to get a 48-inch piece, which is what I'm going to have to do. But now I've got to glue strips of foam together before I even fit them in here to glue the cap on it. And there's actually 6 of these longer ones that need to be made, and now those are now going to be made in 2 pieces and glued in the center in order to make them long enough to fit in here. The only thing that cannot be cut is these cap strips have to be one piece from end to end. You can't piece together the cap strip, obviously, because this is where the strength is coming in. You'll get the strength back in the foam just by gluing the pieces together. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is start out by starting to cut this foam up and trying to make some of the cross frame pieces in here. And then once I get a few of those made, I'll go back and do the lengthwise strips that go in here. And the manual recommends that you start on one side. So side panel here, do the frame pieces on there first, glue those in, glue these on, and then glue the bottom ones on. Or this is actually the top because this is upside down. And then also gluing the parts onto the actual bottom skin that goes on top of here and putting it together that way. So I think I might go ahead and go that route too. Each one of these is going to have to be angled fit, cut to fit in here and get glued on the ends. It's going to have to be cut to fit and go across here and get glued in this corner. So there's a lot of kind of funky angles and fitting, but luckily the foam is really easy to cut with a razor blade, or even a really fine saw. And so yeah, I'm going to start by seeing if I can cut out a few of these foam pieces and start fitting some of this in here, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a couple of them done. All right, I started cutting and fitting some of the foam pieces on the side panel here. And this is essentially what we're doing. We're doing 30 millimeters tall on these, notching them out so that this cross piece carries through on these two. And I put some tape where each one of these frames is supposed to be located on the front. This one's supposed to be 300 millimeters back. This one's supposed to be 600 millimeters back. And then you can see down here in the end where I'm going to have to piece 2 together. So I left it a little bit long just so I have room to trim, because what we have to do is we have to trim this to fit all these angles down here and to step over the metal frame there. On the other end here, we've got to shape that to fit onto frame 7, because that actually will get glued eventually onto the end of frame 7, and then notch it so that it fits over this frame 7 metal frame there. And then each one of these has to be angled and shaped, because they're not supposed to be 90 degrees from the side panel. They're supposed to be 90 degrees from a imaginary center line there, so that all these have to be angled a little bit. And the ends of these are supposed to be angled again also. They're supposed to have about 1 millimeter clearance between the skin and this frame on these two here, because these actually just get glued to the cross pieces that end up being here on the bottom panel and the top panel. So again, I'm just going to keep kind of whittling away at these and fitting these in here, and then we're going to glue one of these metal cap strips on top of each one of these. There'll be one that carries through from this end all the way down to the other end of that piece, and that gets fit inside of these, and then these get their own little cap strips on top also. So this is a little bit of a finicky thing to work on. It's not difficult to do, it's just a little bit time consuming. But before I go today, I'm going to try and get this extension. I'm going to get everything shaped. I'm going to get this extension piece glued on the end here, and I think I can glue the end of this and the cap strip on it at the same time. So I'm going to try and get all these caps glued on to all these pieces so I can let them sit overnight and come back tomorrow morning, and then hopefully be at a point where I can glue these in. And then once these are glued in, I'll flip it over and we'll do the other side panel, and we'll do the same thing. And then we'll do the bottom and the top. So this is probably going to be a several day process. I'll have to work on some other things in between, because this isn't because I'm going to have to wait for glue to dry. So all right, I'm going to keep working on this. I finished shaping these into place on the ends here. Shaped these center ones. They look good all the way down. I've got it seamed right here. Haven't glued that yet, but that's where I'm going to seam it. And then I finished shaping this down here. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and I'll glue this together here in this spot, and I'm going to just prep and glue one of these caps on all of these pieces. I can still do a little bit of final sanding, fitting, especially here where these cross over the centers, you know, after this is all glued and right before I install them. So I'm going to finish getting those ready, and this didn't take me very long, so I'm going to try and do the ones on the opposite side up here. They're the same as this, only in reverse. And I'll see if I can get both of these sets glued overnight, and that way at least tomorrow I can install them at the same time and then get to work on the pieces that are installed on the top panel there. So yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get these glued. I actually still had this board set up in my office where I glued the trailing edge for the horizontal stabilizer, and I just took the other two pieces that I had cut for that procedure and just screwed those down, separated by a slot that's equal to the size of the foam. So what I'm going to do is just push the foam down into the slot here, and down here I will glue these together when I do that, and I'll put a little piece of wax paper down around that, shove this down into the slot, and then I'll lay the metal strips here on top with glue underneath them, and then I'll just put a little bit of weight on those, and I'm just going to leave those sitting overnight. That should take care of gluing the initial side panel. Then what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'll prep the other side, and these of course will be dry. I'll pull these out, and after I prep the other side, I'll go ahead and glue these into the fuselage, put weights on them, and then at the same time while those are drying in the fuselage, I'll take the other side that I've cut just like these, I'll bring those in here and put those in the slots here and glue those at the same time and let those dry. So I'll kind of just keep going back and forth in a you know, glue one set into the fuselage at the same time I'm gluing the caps on the other set here, and I'll just keep working my way back and forth until we get the four sides done. So I glued the first set of these stiffeners that need to be put into the rear fuselage. These came out pretty well. I was just going to show you here what I'm doing to allodyne these little strips here is I'm just taping them on one side to a piece of clear tape and sticking them in a bucket of allodyne for the few minutes, and you can see the tape protects the other side so it doesn't get allodyne, because that's the side that's going to get glued onto the foam. And then on this side you can see it's nicely allodyne. And then for these longer pieces, the ones that are almost 48 inches long, what I'm doing here is just again putting it on a piece of tape and then coiling it up and taping the tape to itself, so there's no tape on this side of the metal. I'll dunk it in the bucket. It'll allodyne the inside of this, but then it'll keep the allodyne off of the outside. That seems to work really slick. So just thought I'd show you what I'm doing there. I'm going to finish allodyning these. I'm trying to get this next set done that goes on the other side of the rear fuselage here. And then the ones that I've already finished, such as this one here, I'm going to glue this into place on this side, the top side of the fuselage here, while I'm gluing the strips, metal strips, on top of the foam pieces that are going to go on this side. So I'm just going to have to go from side to side and then to the bottom to the top, just kind of do one at a time. I'm just trying to do two glue operations at once, where I'm gluing this that's already prepped down to the fuselage while I'm gluing the next set of pieces here that go on the next side. So I'm going to keep working on this. All right, I'm just getting ready to glue this first set of rear fuselage foam stiffeners in place. I've got them all cut and positioned, and I tried to tape off around, or at least along the edges, so I knew exactly where to place these and make sure that I have this long one here, you know, correctly straight. It does still flex a little bit, even though it has that strip of aluminum on there, but it'll also help me get this end aligned properly. So I'm going to apply some glue on these and then just get a bunch of weight on top of all these parts so that they sit overnight and dry, hopefully as straight as possible. I finished gluing the first stiffeners on this one side panel. This turned out really well. It's amazing how stiff this panel becomes with these stiffeners installed. This actually works really, really well. So what I've done is I've already prepped the stiffeners that go on this panel here, so I'm going to get those glued in today, and I'm going to see if I can get the stiffeners made then for the top here. There's two that have to, similar to this one here, there's two full-length ones like this that need to go down the center here. And then there's actually 3 of these. There's 2 that, there's actually, 3 of these that go down here. And I think the one that goes down here actually gets glued all the way across. I've got to check that one, but these, you can see they're short of the side panel. They're actually not supposed to touch the ends, because what we're going to do is the part that gets glued across here, and we're going to glue those together in the corner, but we don't actually glue the corners themselves, the sides themselves, so they stay separated on either side with a little bit of 1 millimeter gap or so at the bottom. And we'll glue these across here and attach these together. The ones on the end here, there's a third one that goes in here on the top and the bottom, but does not have any side pieces that go up. So anyway, I'm going to finish prepping the other side here and see if I can get the bottom pieces all cut to fit in here. I thought I'd just show you how easy it is to cut this Divinity Cell foam. I'm just setting this up to cut a couple of the strips that go in the rear fuselage. This is the 20 millimeter ones. So I'm just going to stick a board across here. I'm just going to measure out right around 20 millimeters. Clamp down my board on top. And we'll come down to the other side here. We'll measure out 20 millimeters. Right there. And I've given myself about a ½ millimeter. I'm making just a little bit longer. Just so I can, take sandpaper underneath the bottom edge and straighten it up if it isn't perfectly straight. So, oops. Anyway, you just clamp the straight edge on here. You just take a fairly sharp razor blade and you can just run the razor blade right along your straight edge. And it pops right off. So that's how I'm cutting all these pieces of foam, just like that. Move this down. I actually have to cut, I'm going to cut 5 of these, because I do have to piece them together, and I've got the 2 on the top panel and the 2 on the bottom panel that I still have to I just finished trial fitting the foam pieces in here on the top of the fuselage, rear fuselage here. So I've got everything notched. I've got everything basically set where it needs to go. This frame here is supposed to be glued in on the end, so this one is supposed to fit tight. This is frame 10. Frame 9 and frame 8 are supposed to be kind of like these side pieces where they're about 1 millimeter from the edge here and only glued to the corner and across the bottom, but not on the ends. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these foam pieces out and I'm going to go ahead and glue that cap strip on there. I'd still need to prep and allodyne that cap strip, but I'll get those glued on there, and then since these haven't been glued in yet on this side, I'll go ahead and apply glue and some weights on top of these that are already prepped to be installed, and I'll get those glued in place. and we'll let all that sit overnight, and we'll come back tomorrow, and then these should be all ready to be installed tomorrow. And after that's done, then it's a matter of getting this bottom panel actually glued and poppered on. I have to figure out, because this matrix here of foam pieces is supposed to also go on the bottom panel, but what it sounds like in the manual is you're really not supposed to put any of that on until after you get the bottom glued and riveted on, and you're supposed to, I believe, do it from the inside, from the front here. Getting all the way back there to frame 10 might be a little bit difficult, so I might figure out if I can cut all those and get those pre-fit in here before I put the top panel on, because I should have, you know, these glued in place. I should be able to fit the piece that's going to go across here, get it all prepped and pre-cut, and have the cap strip on it. So even if I do have to glue it, it's just a matter of, you know, getting back in here, fitting it, slipping it, and gluing it. But I do have to do these end pieces here. Now I do have the option with these, is I could install these on this panel before it's put in place. These won't interfere except for down in here where it's going to have to be slipped into here into place and then put down. But I think I'm going to do that at least, because trying to position these and glue these in place after this panel is done through this front frame 7, that could get a little tight, especially way down there in the end. So yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out exactly what I can do to make this an easier process than trying to crawl inside of the rear fuselage. All right, I got the other side glued in here. This came out pretty well. I just pulled all the weights off of it this morning that I had laying on top, and I'm ready now to glue the pieces on the top here. Now, of course, I glued the caps on overnight. I ran into a little bit of a problem though, and they ended up sticking to the I did this a little bit different. The other ones I actually put like metal weights and metal bars on top of it. They didn't seem to stick to here, but these I actually, because they were sitting next to each other like this, when I glued the caps, I just set a board on top and just put weights on top of the board. But obviously I got enough glue that came out the sides when I was moving it around and positioning it that I ended up with glue on top of these cap strips, and it stuck. Now, it didn't damage the part here at all. I was able to pop them off. It took a little bit of effort with a razor blade along the edge, and I was able to pop them back off. But there's no way that I can get this glue off of here. Acetone, nothing's going to take this off, especially with the laminate board that stuck to it. So I've got no choice but to sand the tops of these off, or at least, you know, Scotch-Brite until I get this stuff off of the top of here. But then I've lost my Aladyne finish, which was put on the metal before these were glued. Now, what I'm thinking about doing here is just cleaning these up. Go ahead and get the Aladyne off of them and get the residual glue and wood. What I think I can do is I'm just going to create a small bath of Aladyne and put these in there upside down like this. Now, I've already tested that, you know, I stuck this in Aladyne for 5 minutes. It does nothing to the foam. This is PVC based foam, closed cell foam. It literally washes right off. So I'm not concerned about the Aladyne, you know, deteriorating or doing anything to the foam. And I've also tested the epoxy too. The Aladyne has no effect on epoxy. So I'm not too concerned about at least prepping these, and I'll just basically float these upside down in an Aladyne bath just to re-Aladyne the tops of these. I could just spray them with primer, but then none of it's going to match. So I'm going to try and fix these the best way I can so they at least look decent. So I'm going to try that out, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm ready to glue these in. Okay, I finished fitting all of the foam stiffeners for the top side of the fuselage here. I was able to re-Aladyne the longer ones, and I think I did this one too, where I had the glue that got stuck on the top. Actually, sanding that off and just flipping these upside down and just holding them a 1/4 inch under Aladyne worked just fine. They actually look perfect. In fact, they look a little bit better than the ones I did the right way. But yeah, this looks really good. I'm ready to glue these in now. So that's the next step. I'm gonna go ahead and get these glued in, and then I can start working on the cross pieces for the top, or the bottom I should say, because this has been upside down. So I'm gonna glue these in. We'll see what they look like when they're done. So I finished gluing in all the stiffeners on the top panel that you can see on the bottom of the fuselage that's flipped over here. This turned out really good. I'm very happy with this. This is really stiff now, both these side panels. I can barely move them at all. I was a little bit concerned about that when I was gluing in these cross members, which have to be glued together to the side pieces here. So what I did is I actually put the bottom panel on the fuselage and pinned it at about 6 spots, just to make sure that these two fuselage sides on the top here in the middle were the correct distance apart, so that I didn't have to try and pull this in or bend this out in order to get the top, or the actual bottom panel that goes on top of here installed on the next step. So I'm glad I did that, because now I'm looking at how stiff these sides ended up, that it's almost impossible to try and bend this thing out or get it to go out without it trying to buckle potentially this bottom panel that has to go on here next. So what we have to do is these cross supports that we put in here and these two lengthwise supports that are here, we have to do the same thing on the bottom here for the bottom panel that goes on here, because again this is upside down, so it's a little confusing trying to say top and bottom here. But what you're supposed to do is, I should be right now gluing and pop riveting this bottom panel on here and waiting for that to dry, then flipping this fuselage right side up, and then reaching in through the front here. I'd probably have to take this off, but reaching into here and then gluing one of these on the bottom panel, gluing this on the bottom panel, this one on the bottom panel, and these two lengthwise pieces all the way down the ends. I'm not sure I want to try and do that after I have completely covered up the bottom of the rear fuselage. I just think that's going to be too hard to do. I'm going to get glue everywhere. And so what I think I'm going to try and do here is actually glue in the 3 cross supports here with this panel open, and actually go in and put these two, which will be notched into this one, and that one, and gluing those into place before I put the bottom panel on. I just think that I can be more accurate at assembling this way than trying to do it the way it's mentioned in the manual. And then by having all of those foam pieces sitting up here, what I can do is then just put glue on all the foam pieces, glue all the way around the perimeter here. For the bottom panel, I'll go ahead and set the bottom panel on there, pop rivet it into place, and then I'll flip this right side up, and then I'll go inside the fuselage and just pretend this is the bottom once it's flipped over. I'll just put weights on everything to make sure that those supports get glued down to that panel. That's the only way I can think to really do this. The other thing I could do, I guess, is I could glue in the cross supports only, and then what I could do is glue the lengthwise supports to the bottom panel, pre-glue those in, and then when I go to put that panel in, I could fit it under the back and have it glued on the ends, and then have it glued where the cross supports are, and then I could slip it down into place. I could do that. My only concern with that is that these fit here are really pretty tight, and if I misaligned the position of these when they were glued onto that panel, it would almost be impossible for me to snap it down into place with these already in there and pre-cut out. I'm a little bit concerned about that whole thing coming together right. So I think if I just glue the matrix of stuff that needs to go in here first, because I can glue them on the ends here, the cross supports will be held here and here, and they'll have a strip of aluminum on them which will stiffen them up. That's the only way I can think to do this properly. I don't even know if I have enough reach here with my arm and even sticking my head in there to get down there and see what I'm doing. I think that's going to be impossible to do. So I'm going to try and do this a different way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and start cutting the cross supports that go here, get those fit in, clamped into place, and ready to apply the the aluminum doubler strip that's going to be glued on the top, because what I'm going to do tonight is I'll have to take all these pieces that I've prepped as far as cutting length and width and fit in here and glue those strips on tonight, and then I'll come back tomorrow and I'll go ahead and glue those into position before I glue the panel down. So that's what I'm going to work on next. I just finished fitting and sanding all the foam supports that are going to go on the bottom panel. I've got those all fitting here. They're just kind of held in together with the pressure of the foam. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the cap strips that are supposed to go on here, the metal cap strips, and get those glued on. And then what I'm going to do tomorrow when I come back in is I'll fit these back in here again. I'll have to do a little bit of sanding and fitting on the ends. I have these a little bit tight right now. And I'll figure out tomorrow if I still think this is the good way to go, which is to actually glue these into place on the ends here, and then glue these on the ends and where they intersect the cross members, let that all dry, and then glue the panel on all at once to these pieces, flip it over and put weights on it so that I get these foam pieces to fit tight and the bottom panel to glue tight. Yeah, so I'm gonna when I come back tomorrow, we'll figure out if I can fit these in here and I feel comfortable that they're nice and flat and that I can get, you know, straight edge across here and make sure that this is going to be perfectly flat once I get the panel on. There's a lot of things I got to check, but like I said, if I had to try and reach in here, you know, I could get the front one in here, I maybe get that one in there, but there's no way I'm getting that back one in there and getting weights on it and stuff. So yeah, we'll check it out tomorrow after I get the stiffeners on there, which will make these things much stiffer and straighter, and we'll see if they'll fit. I did notice something I'm going to have to be careful of on this bottom panel. So this is the bottom panel and this is the inside. This control fitting that has to be mounted on here, you know, gets flipped over, and if you look down there, you'll see that's where the control fitting that goes on the upper surface of the skin. But this one here actually ends up going over like this and will almost butt against this frame here. And then as it comes forward, it will almost hit this here. In fact, I think I've got I think it's supposed to go right here between these two rivet holes according to my measurements, but I'm gonna have to offset it just a little bit because it does appear like the end of this is going to hit the side of this. But when I glue these in, if I do glue these in separately, I won't be gluing the end here because this is frame 7, it has to come off, so I'm not going to glue this on the end. So this will just stay free, which means I can glue all the cross pieces, glue the intersection here and here, but this will just remain free, and then when I actually put the panel itself on and go to glue it and rivet it, I can adjust this properly so that it clears this fitting. And what I'll do is I'll just leave this fitting in here with the temporary sheet metal fasteners so that it, you know, if it needs to just ride up against the edge, that's what I'll do to make sure that I can get this fitting in and out until it's ready to be installed permanently. So yeah, that's just another thing I noticed that I got to watch for. But I realized since this isn't going to be glued on the end, the position of this can be moved up until the point where I put the panel on and actually permanent glue it and pop rivet it into place. So I'm going to keep going here and get these doublers on top. So I came back late last night and I did go ahead and glue all of the supports in place here for the bottom panel on the rear fuselage. One of the critical things about doing this is that obviously once I put these cross supports in here, I'm permanently fixing these two sides together into whatever width they are at the time I clamped all this together. So I just, the one thing I would caution anybody about trying to do what I did here is after I had everything clamped underneath inside the fuselage, I did take that bottom panel over there and I set it on top of here and I clecoed it in place in a bunch of places to make sure that that panel still fits. Because if I made any of these supports a little bit wider and pushed apart the two sides, my rivet holes, which are already drilled in here to their final size, have to match. So I'm hoping it still fits. I'm hoping I don't have any fit issues. The only critical one was this back one here. I take this is what I use for weights. I put these on top of each one of these cross supports, and then I clamped with some clamps over here. I just clamped it to this to keep it perfectly straight when it was drying, just to make those as straight as possible, knowing that these do flex a little bit. So, you know, once I flip this over and glue it down to all of this, I can put weights on it with it right side up and weight these foam parts down. But anyway, so this one here, this one actually gets glued all the way across on the sides also. So this one was a little bit difficult to hold into place. I just kind of wedged it in here, put the panel on, and checked all the rivets to make sure they fit. Then what I did is I took it apart and then put the bar across there and clamped it in. And just feeling with these foam pieces, I can see the transition looks good there. So hopefully the width is good. Okay, so I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to clean it all up, and what I'm going to do is prep the bottom panel for gluing. I might have to do a little bit of sanding, just a little bit of touch up on some of these, but otherwise I think this looks good. Now these are not glued into place on the ends here, so these move on both sides. And one of the things I do have to check, like I mentioned, is on that panel is where that, I think I have it sitting over there, but that's where that you know, flight control bracket goes, and I have to make sure that it doesn't hit the side of this, or if it does, that I just move this over just enough to clear it. All right, so let me get all these weights off here, and let me double check and see how the fit looks. Okay, I just refit the bottom panel on there, and everything still fits absolutely perfect like it was when I glued these in last night. So now what I'm going to do is take this panel off. I'm just going to do a little bit of prep work to the foam cross pieces that are in there. I've got to get the plastic off of the pop riveted edge that goes on both sides. And I gotta Scotch-Brite that and make sure I prep that for glue. Once that's done, I'm gonna go ahead and put glue on everything and pop rivet this all the way around the sides, not along the front, because this frame needs to still come out. And yeah, then what I'll do is I'll flip it over right side up, and then I will reach inside and just put weights on top of all of the foam supports that are in there, just to make sure that they're pressed flat against the bottom here, and that we get a good flat surface on the bottom and get a good glue joint with all of those foam parts. But this, I'm glad I did this way, because this was much easier for me, even though it was kind of a, you know, two-step process in that I had to put those supports in, let them dry overnight, and then come back to glue the bottom on and glue the supports to the bottom. But I think that was much easier than trying to work inside of this little compartment here with glued pieces that I'd have to reach in there all the way back 3 frames and try and fit those in. So yeah, I'm very happy with this. All right, we're getting close to having this done. Once this bottom panel is glued in, which I'll have done today, the only other thing I'm going to do to this before I call this complete is to actually glue and rivet the fin in place, because we don't need to get into anything else in here except install the flight controls, which we'll be able to do through this access panel, and we'll be able to access the rudder through that opening there, and then we'll still be able to reach in here to finish this fitting that needs to go in place on the top and the bottom, which is accessible here on this first frame. So yeah. So I went around and checked all the cross supports here just to make sure I didn't have any high spots on the edges or high spots on these transition points here, these cross point locations. And then what I did is I just took a straight edge and just laid it across each one of these frames just to make sure that the skin was square and flat on each end, and that it was flat and touching all the way across each one of the supports, which all of them are perfectly. So I went ahead and scuffed up these edges with some Scotch-Brite. I'm going to hit those with some acetone just to make sure they're cleaned up. But I'm ready at this point to glue. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some glue, and we'll see if we can get this glued and pop it into place. So I'm back at the shop today. The bottom panel here has completely dried. It turned out really good. I'm actually quite happy with how I did the stiffeners inside of here. And boy, is this is stiff. This is actually quite strong. And just so you're aware, I did weigh this rear fuselage section. On the scale, this weighed 8 pounds 11 ounces. Now, I've actually got 35 temporary sheet metal fasteners still stuck in this thing, so I went ahead and collected some other sheet metal fasteners I had and I weighed them. They weighed just over a pound. I think it was 1 pound and 8/10 of an ounce. So this entire structure weighs really just over 7.5 pounds. So I think you can see how when you get this airplane completed, how you can end up with an airplane that only weighs 175 pounds empty weight. So anyway, this looks great. The next thing we're going to do here is I've got to finish installing the nut plates that need to go on these 4 holes here in the center on frame 11. The other thing we have to do too is there's 2 pop rivets that have to go in here that are countersunk because there's a plate that's going to get screwed down over the top of this. So countersunk rivet here, 30 seconds, countersunk rivet here, 30 seconds. And what I'm doing here is I kind of made a mistake here. I actually drilled the rivet holes for these nut plates into frame 11 before gluing the skin on. So right now I've got the skin glued on top, but I have no way of seeing exactly where those holes are that are already drilled into the frame to put the rivets in. Now I'm gonna try, let me see here, I found one, fell in here. Okay, so here's one of the nut plates that has to go on the back. And like I said, I drilled the holes already, so what I can do is I can put a screw in here from the top side, try and center it and hit those holes. And since these holes ended up in exactly the same spot and these holes are actually fairly tight with the screw, I'm pretty confident that I can get this centered over the existing hole and then drill out these 3/30 seconds holes. Now what I am doing, let me find my other nut plate here. What I am going to do when I drill those is I'm using floating nut plates in these holes when I'm done, but a fixed nut plate, at least with these nut plates that I bought, the holes are spaced exactly the same. Now I don't want to use the floating nut plate to try and locate the rivet holes here because the floating nut plate will move, so the surface where the rivets go through is going to slide across the top. I got to be able to locate those holes, so I'm going to use the fixed nut plate on top. And what I did is I've got a screw here that I wrapped some tape around. And the reason for the tape is to just make sure it's tight in the hole. As a matter of fact, this won't even go into the hole, but I can feed it up through the back here, screw it into this nut plate on the top, and it will self-center it into the existing hole here, and I'll try and get it as straight as possible and then just drill through and get all these nut plate holes drilled. We got to countersink those rivets too. So this is what I'm going to work on next. The other thing I forgot about is we haven't finished frame 7 up here yet. I do need to take this all apart, clean these up, aludyne these parts, and rivet all of this frame 7 together, which I am going to do as part of the rear fuselage here because that needs to be done before we start the front half. But for now I'm going to get these done, and once these are done we can start installing the fin and the fin spar and getting that all riveted in place. I was able to get these 2 nut plates in place by using a screw on the backside because I could reach through this hole. These 2 here, I'm not able to get to them from the backside at all. What I ended up doing is just cutting off a screw and screwing it into the nut plate, and then I wrapped tape around it to the point where it just fits snug into this hole so that I can slide it down and hopefully it's centered then on the hole properly, and it seems to be catching the other holes I drilled in there. They're so close that it doesn't seem like it's a problem. But yeah, I got these 2 end countersunk rivets in place too, so I'm just going to install these last 2 and we'll be done. Alright, I finished getting all the nut plates installed on frame 11, and I just reinstalled my panel here just to test fit and make sure all the screws still aligned properly after gluing the bottom and getting all the nut plates in place, and it fits perfectly. Didn't have to adjust anything. So this looks great. So next what we're going to do is actually fit the fin back in here. The fin spar goes here, and we do need to rivet this in place. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over and fit the fin in place. So I finished fitting the fin in place. I wanted to make sure that I protected the area inside of the fin though before I glue it in place. So I did tape off and spray some zinc phosphate primer in under there. This is a good place where a lot of dirt could collect or debris over time. So I've got that all prepared. Once this dries, I'll take the tape off and then I'll mix up some glue and I'm ready to bond the fin in place. So that's what I'm gonna do next. So I went back and put the fin back on and just taped around the outside of the fin so that I would know between where the outside of the fin is and the backside of the fin where I need to apply glue, and also where I needed to go back and scuff up and clean with acetone where the glue is going to be applied. So I'm now ready to mix up the glue and glue this down. I realized there were a couple other loose ends that need to be tied up here with the rear fuselage. And so since I was mixing the glue up to install the vertical fin, I decided I might as well prep these couple of small pieces that were left. So this is the access panel that goes on the bottom of the airplane. There's supposed to be 2 stiffeners that are glued about 72 millimeters apart here. And so what I'm going to do is just glue these in place at the same time I'm gluing the fin, and then I prep the aluminum caps that go on top of there. I'm going to glue these all at once because these are small enough that they keep themselves straight enough. I can just put some weight on top of these, and as long as they're spaced properly, they'll glue and dry properly. So I'm going to go mix up some glue now, and we'll start gluing everything together. All right, as you probably saw in the time-lapse video, I got the fin glued in and pop riveted into place. It looks awesome. I got the fit pretty good along here. I did set this weight on top of here. I had on the other side there, I had just a little bit of a raised bump there after pop riveting these 2 pop rivets on the other side. And if I just put a little bit of weight on it, since it's going to be glued, I just stuck some weight on it to push it down. Otherwise, I got a nice tight seam all the way along here. And of course in the back here, I just put the clecos in place for now, temporary sheet metal fasteners just to hold the rear spar while it's being glued. And of course I haven't riveted the underside of this to frame 12. So I didn't rivet the spar yet. I have it held in with the temporary sheet metal fasteners. And I think what I'm going to do is just leave this overnight, let it dry. I did use a laser level here. So I can set this up again. I put a laser level on top of here. And I've noticed because this is angled, you got to make sure that you get it, you know, not turned even just a little bit, or you'll be off a few degrees. And even taking something like a drill bit here and propping it up so it is level this way does make a difference. So I was able to get this set up a few minutes ago. Now let's see, I gotta find my rivets. Well, there we go, we're pretty much there. Okay, so we're pretty much there. So I've got 0 degrees here, and I just kept putting some shims underneath this board here to get the front of this so that this would read 0 and be level. And I don't know if I can do this with one hand or not, but if I then take this to the back here, and what I did is I just stuck my 6mm precision rod through the bearing supports for the horizontal stabilizer, and these are actually parallels for my, I think it's trying to tell me, is it running out of batteries? No? Anyway, why is this alarm going off? Oh, I think I have the, I think I bumped it so that it would tell me when it was level. Anyway, so these are actually just parallels for my milling machine. These are precision made, and what I was able to do is they're pretty much just have a 6mm hole in the middle. I was able to slide these onto either side of that rod, which gives me at least a small flat surface on here to balance my level on top of here. Let's see, and you can see it reads 0. So that tells me that at least between frame 7 over there and my horizontal stabilizer fittings, I am perfectly level. Now, this was not perfectly level throughout this building process. I've checked this many times and it's been off as much as a ½ degree. I kind of chalked it up to, well, I don't have pop rivets in here, I don't have pop rivets in there, I've got plastic on things, especially when it was all fit together with the, you know, the frames just held into place with a temporary sheet metal fastener. So I'm absolutely thrilled that now that I have it all glued and riveted together, that I am exactly level on both of those. You know, even with these stiffeners now being in place inside, you start wondering if stuff's going to move or change or not. But really, ever since I initially drilled all 4 of the panels, and this is in the manual really, that once you drill this the fourth panel onto these 3, it's locked into place. It's not going to move. So anyway, very happy with this. We're going to let this dry overnight. I'll come back tomorrow, and we're just going to finish the few things that need to be finished, and then we're going to call the rear fuselage done. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is get all of the rivets installed in the fin spar here to frame 12. There's a few things here. There's 4 1/8" pop rivets that we can install in those 4 holes. I haven't final drilled them into the frame yet, but they are in the spar. And then the spar itself is supposed to get 3/32 universal head rivets. I do have a little bit of an issue. I can get my rivet gun into this side and access all of these and put the heads on the spar side. On the back side here, you can see we have to go through the frame 12 in a few spots, and then we actually go through those aluminum passageways for the rudder cables on those 3 rivets on either side. Of course, the rule of thumb is that the head of the rivet should be on the thinner side of the aluminum that's being joined together. And obviously these spar caps themselves are 1/16 inch, and then it goes through a spar web that's 20 thousandths, and then it goes through a 20 thousandths frame here. So theoretically, for all of these rivets, I should be trying to get the head on the back side here, but there's no way I can get a rivet gun in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use the rivet squeezer, and I think I can get down at least, well, I can get down at least 2. I'll check and see if I can get down any further. I do have a large size rivet squeezer yoke that I think might even get down further. I'll see. I'm going to go down as far as I can with the heads on the inside, but I'll switch to using the heads on the outside once I have to actually start using a rivet gun in here. And of course, bucking these rivets down at the very bottom is going to be a very tight fit. I'm going to have to figure out how I can even get down in there. I don't even have a bucking bar that I can get down in that little spot, but we'll see. It's these two here on the end that are going to be a little bit tricky. So anyway, I'm going to start riveting these and see how far I get here. I'll show you what it looks like when I get a few of them in here and if I can get my rivet squeezer down there far enough or not. So I was able to get the top 2 rivets set with some modifications to my rivet squeezer. So there wasn't enough depth with just that end 3/36 end piece on there to get around this flange here. And then the other issue I had is that these nut plates are right behind it, and the rivets for the nut plates that are sticking down actually get in the way of reaching that rivet, you know, past the end of this rivet set. So what I did is I stacked some washers on top of the shaft of the universal head rivet end of it, and just to give it a little bit more depth, but it also made it so that they were a little bit narrower, and it actually made it so that it fit around these rivets that are down in here, these nut plate rivets that are in there. So anyway, I was able to get the first 2 set. I think I can do the next 3 using my 3-inch yoke on my rivet squeezer. Those should reach down in there, and then I'll see how I'm going to set the last 2, but let me get these next ones set and then we'll figure out what to do with the rest. So I got the first 4 rivets down installed. I did have to make another modification to get this to work. So the problem with this hitting the side of the spar cap as you went down only, made it so I couldn't get the last, the 4th one down, because the spar cap is thicker than the rivet tail at that point. So what I did is I cut a piece of the 3/16 music wire that were used for the tail skid and also for the tool that we made to do the spot stamping. That is exactly the same diameter as the shaft that holds the these rivet sets in place. So I was able to slip that down in there, cut it, and I can still screw it up and down to the right length. And I was able to use that to set the 2 bottom rivets, although I screwed up on the one that you can see here on the left. You can see the head isn't seated flat. I didn't get enough pressure on the head when I was squeezing it, so now I got to get down in there with a angle drill and drill the head of that off and knock it out and try and install another one. I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do with the last 2, but let me get this this rivet replaced that I got to fix, and then we'll figure out what to do with the rest. Alright, I got the next 2 down in there installed. I did put the heads on the spar cap side here and bucked them on the back, and that worked alright. I had to modify my rivet set here and grind the end down to make clearance, because it's real tight fit between the end of that rivet and the edge of the cap. I also had to drill one of this rivet on the right side out and reinstall it, because the head wasn't seated as well as I wanted. But yeah, this looks good now. I have no idea how I'm gonna do those N2, honestly. I can get the rivet gun on this side, but I have no way of getting a bucking bar down to those holes because of the angles down there. This bucking bar won't fit because it's got to be angled. I've got some other tools I can see if I can get down in there with, but this isn't going to be easy. So let me see what I can figure out here. We'll see if I can get the last 2 installed. So I was able to get the last 2 rivets in the bottom. What I had to do is on the back side, I found a chisel in my toolbox, and I was able to just get some tape on the end of it, tape on this side, and fit it down in the back here and pound it. Anyway, I got these in. They're not perfect, but for those end ones, I think it's good enough. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I have to drill out these 1/8 inch holes, rivet holes. There's 4 of them that have to go in here. Those just get pop rivets. So I'm gonna go ahead and install those next. And I forgot to show you, this is the panel that covers this section here. This is what I finished yesterday when I was gluing the fin in place. So I've got all those pieces glued on there. This turned out really nice and it fits good. So yeah, we're almost done here with the back, and then we're gonna go up to frame 7 and Aladyne and rivet all those parts together. All right, I finished putting in the last 4 rivets, which were the 1/8 inch pop rivets that go in that spar. So this aft section is for the most part complete. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and finish this rudder fitting at the bottom here at the time that I have to install the rudder and hook up the not only the rudder controls but also the elevator controls. I think I'm going to do that as part of the flight control installation on the rear fuselage, which I'll make another video that just covers doing all the flight controls in the tail section here, which includes the rear fuselage and includes the these supports that need to go in here and the bell crank part that needs to go inside the rear fuselage. We'll do that all at once, and I'll finalize all the rudder stuff at the bottom here anyway with the fitting at the same time. So what I'm going to do now is move up to the front to frame 7, and we're going to start Aladyning the frame 7 parts up here that need to be finished. And most of this gets, actually, believe it or not, pop riveted together. The only parts that require solid rivets, I believe, are the cross support straps, at least in this part. There is a seatbelt fitting that's going to go here that's made out of steel, and that gets riveted with solid rivets too. But I think the only solid rivets are on these straps here on either side. Otherwise, everything else is pop rivets. So we should be able to get that together pretty quick. I have all the parts cleaned and Aladyned for frame 7, and I'm now ready to just do the final riveting on this. Now the only thing that gets the solid rivets are the straps here. So the 3 rivets on either end of these 2 straps are going to get a solid rivet that I got to cut, and the rest of these just get a standard pop rivet. So I think what I'm going to do is just install all the pop rivets first and all the corners, get those set, and then I will go back and just do the center straps at the end. So yeah, I'm gonna start riveting all this, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Now, let me mention one other thing. These rivets here really should be installed from the back, with the head on the back and the shop head, or the buck side on the front here, because we've got a thinner 20 thousandths material connecting to a, I believe this is 40 thousandths material. So I'm going to do those with this flipped over the other direction, just to pound those from the back side. The other pop rivets aren't going to matter because most of it's 20 thousandths connecting to 20 thousandths. So we'll put all those heads on the front side here. While I was working on this, I did want to mention a couple things about this pop rivet gun here. So this is considered an aircraft pop rivet gun. It's kind of an old school. It's been around for a long time. It's a PRP-26A pop rivet gun. They're actually somewhat expensive, I mean, compared to a home store type of pop rivet gun. I've been extremely happy with how this functions. Nothing ever gets jammed in here. It just works great. But one of the benefits of this particular pop rivet gun is that it gets into these tight spaces, which we constantly have on the CriCri. You can see I don't have any space on the front side of this pop rivet gun when it's in here. It's exactly where it needs to be. Now, I did have to take a grinder to the front nose of this and grind it off a little bit to flatten it out, but I don't know of any other pop rivet gun that I could have done that to and been able to get into some of these tight spaces like this. So I just wanted to comment on this because this rivet gun has been, invaluable with working on a CriCri. So I'd highly recommend it. All right, as you can see, I finished all the pop riveting part of frame 7, so now I'm ready to go and install the solid rivets that go in the remaining 12 spots. If you were watching the time-lapse video, you might have seen me putting something on the end of this rivet. I commented on this before, but I might as well comment on it again. This is a nose piece for an 1/8 inch rivet. However, these AVEX rivets have a smaller diameter shaft, and I found that if I pull these AVEX rivets with an 1/8 inch nose piece in the rivet gun, that it tends to distort the end of the rivet. It will actually start around the center hole. When it pops, it will pull some of the aluminum up into the hole of the rivet gun, so it leaves kind of almost a sharp edge that you have to go back and file off. So I take a steel washer and I just precision drilled the exact same hole size as the shaft of the rivet. It's even a little bit difficult to get on there. It's so closely matched to the size. But what that does is it makes sure that when I pull it down here at the bottom of the rivet, that I get a nice, fairly smooth top to the rivet once it pulls through. So I don't have any real cleanup I have to do. So it's just a little bit of extra step to make it look a little bit nicer. But yeah, these are good. Also, just this is a cherry rivet, which is considered more of a structural rivet. It's also an 1/8 inch pop rivet, and I only use these in places where I'm going thicker than, I believe, 63 thousandths, I think. This has a minimum grip length, so you don't want to pull this on too thin a material, and on two pieces that are 40 thousandths combined together. I try not to use these, but this has a bigger diameter shaft, so this fits into the end of the rivet gun, with a little less play. It's not perfect, but it doesn't seem to distort the top of these rivets. It's really only the AVEX ones which have a finer shaft. Okay, so I'm gonna get set up to buck these last 12 rivets and we'll be done with this. Okay, so there it is. Frame 7 is complete. I only screwed up on one of my rivets that I had to replace. I'll show you in a picture here. My camera SD card was full. So, but anyway, this is finished. So what we're going to do now is take this and put it back on the rear fuselage and just temporarily attach it with temporary sheet metal fasteners. This will have to come on and off the rear fuselage and go on to the forward half of the fuselage, since this is the part that really connects the two together. This piece is what we're going to use when we start framing up the forward fuselage. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to go ahead and set up the rear fuselage and put the tail all together so that we can just see what it's all going to look like. Let me show you one thing here though with the attachment of this to the rear fuselage. Okay, so here's the rear fuselage that we completed earlier, and you can see here's the foam stiffeners that we have in place. There's actually a little gap underneath here that we notched out, and of course we didn't glue the ends of this to frame 7. We stopped right basically where my Aladyne line is here. So there's actually a little slot that the rear fuselage, or I'm sorry, that frame 7 fits into here around all of these stiffeners in the back. And what we'll have to do is when we eventually we'll glue in frame 7 actually to the sheet metal here, and we'll put glue then in each one of these spots to attach each one of these foam stiffeners at the same time. Frame 7 is what glues or connects both the rear fuselage and the forward fuselage, and it's all glued together in this spot. So for now we're just going to attach this back on here temporarily. Alright, I went ahead and reinstalled frame 7 on the rear fuselage. And as you can see, I've got the tail on. Come to the back here, I've got the rudder on. So now the question is, can I say I've got half an airplane done or not? Everything so far with this has turned out really as perfect as it could. I'm very happy with how the fin fits here. The rudder's fitting good. There's a little bit, point this out, and you can see it's hitting right here. It just barely touches. I gotta trim a little bit out in there so that clearance is just a little bit more. But yeah, otherwise, everything here looks awesome.